Republican presidential candidates Ron DeSantis and Mike Pence are promising to rename a military base after a Confederate general if they are elected.
And I also look forward to, as president, restoring the name of Fort Bragg to our great military base in Fayetteville, North Carolina, and thank the people that have served there, and they're proud of their service there. And it's an iconic name and an iconic base, and we're not going to let political correctness run amok in North Carolina.
We will rebuild our military. We will give our soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, and Coast Guard the support they need to accomplish their mission. We will end the political correctness in the hallways of the Pentagon, and North Carolina will once again be home to Fort Bragg.
Fort Liberty, North Carolina was called Fort Bragg. The installation's former name honors Braxton Bragg, a North Carolinian who is known for being a slave owner and losing a lot of Civil War battles that contributed to the Confederacy's downfall. The Department of Defense officially changed the name of the base earlier this month after Congress passed a law in 2021 that established a commission to rename DoD properties that were named after people who tried to commit sedition against the United States of America and uphold slavery by tearing apart the Union. Where do I begin?
Seems like the party has bigger problems than to take on new ones.
It's really unbelievable that you have Ron DeSantis and Mike Pence and all the people cheering in the audience, like, cheering about a Confederate general who tried to kill American troops to uphold slavery. Now, they will try to mix that with Jefferson and Washington and others, and Madison, who were slaveholders, who actually also presidents of the United States, and created founding documents that actually freed more people than anybody else on the face of the earth. We can walk through that debate as we walk through the debate with Wilson and figure out how we balance these two truths that Thomas Jefferson, yes, he was a slaveholder who, again, wasn't especially liked even by other slaveholders during his time, and yet he created a document that freed more human beings than any other political document ever written. Here, what's the balancing act? What are we balancing here? This guy tried to kill American troops so he could uphold slavery. This is so Ron DeSantis is the pro-slavery general candidate. Mike Pence is the pro-slavery. Like, this is pretty clear cut. And you know, somebody said this weekend, oh, well, this is a dog whistle. I said, this is not a dog whistle. This is not a dog whistle. A dog whistle is going after Jews by talking about George Soros. You got to take a couple of steps, but they're there. This is like, we are going to fight attempts to stop naming bases against losers who lost wars for the Confederacy so they could keep their slaves. This is just like right in your face racism.
It's not a dog whistle, it's a damn foghorn.
Right.
And for me, just somewhat before we get to the question around heritage and all this other, for me, viscerally, these sorts of appeals, right, makes me think of my great-grandmother and my great-grandfather and people who grew up in the South, black people who grew up in the South who had to deal with the implications of that appeal.
Right.
And so it's a brazen appeal to hatreds, a brazen appeal to the belief that certain people possess, right, the country, and other people should just simply shut up and be grateful. Then there's that's that visceral emotional response to DeSantis
right.
and Pence presenting it with all that piety that he does just really irks me.
Right.
But then there's the reality of what they're doing politically. And what they're doing politically is revealing what's at the heart of the Trump base, of the Republican Party's base. Right. And that's hatred, fear, grievance. So political correctness becomes a shorthand. Critical race theory becomes a shorthand. Diversity, inclusion, equity and inclusion, a shorthand. People that look like me, a shorthand. People who aren't heterosexual, a shorthand. In other words, whenever they get a chance to appeal to people's fears and hatreds, they do. And to me, it's eroding the very fabric or tearing the very fabric of the country apart.
I always talk about how we're moving towards a more perfect union, how we have over decades. I was very moved by Tim Scott talking about on The View, talking about in the 1920s, his father, his grandfather would have to step off the sidewalk and keep his eyes down if somebody walked past. And now look where he is. Look, it was because this belief that America was always going to be better. And we've made tremendous progress. We have a long way to go. But I've got to say, within the Republican Party, you look at the Republican Party. When I was there, even in the 1990s, this would never. I mean, this maybe it happened somewhere. I don't know, but I can tell you in my district, we were having battles to rename a street in Pensacola for Martin Luther King Jr., and it actually got a little ugly, and all the Republican people were on the same side. Rename the damn street. Get in, let's get ready, get into the 21st century. Nikki Haley, what was it, 6, 7, 8 years ago, took down the Confederate flag. Does anybody believe that Nikki Haley or any other Republican would take down a Confederate flag now? No, just wouldn't do it because things have regressed so much. I always talk about the Iowa Congressman
Steve
King, who was taken off a committee for saying things that were racially insensitive. They would make him chairman of the committee today. It has in this Trump Republican Party. On the issue of race, we have seen a retrenchment, and I would say a setback that takes us back to the mid-1960s at least.
Don't disagree with that.
Totally different from the party we were part of. I think of Ed Brooks. I think of 41. I think of this tradition of republicanism that was committed to civil rights. People with disabilities, just go down the list. This really believed in equal opportunity. This is something very different. Well, what's ironic? I listen to this. It's almost a wokeism of the right. They're criticizing what they see as the wokeism of the left, but you listen to it. It's all coded words or not so coded words, appealing very much to a totally different constituency, and
it's identity politics.
Yeah, totally, and it's now because it's a kind of it's the new fashion of Republican politics,
and it's an ever narrowing Republican base because it's all based on victimhood. It's all based on the very things that conservatives used to loathe. They're now victims. They're snowflakes. They can be triggered by just about anything, and you look at what's been happening. And again, they're the ones, Jonathan Lemire, they're the ones who are snowflakes. They're actually comfortable attacking our men and women in uniform, calling them weak and woke. Calling them weak and woke because of a renaming of a base, taking the name away from a slaveholder who was fighting to actually destroy the United States of America so he could keep his slaves. I mean, it's just absolutely crazy. When you ask anybody across the globe about the U.S. military, they'll tell you that we're stronger at any point relative to the rest of the world than any time since World War II. We just are. There's just no debate about that, except among Republicans who are doing their damnedest to attack and criticize the United States military and drive down actually recruiting.
On the eve of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, there were senators who praised the Russian military, said that should be a model.
Why can't we be more like Russians?
Why can't we be more macho and tough like that? And the blatant, it's a foghorn about Confederate generals who fought to defend slavery. It is being triggered by a base renaming. It's being triggered by a Bud Light ad. It's being triggered by a Target ad campaign. And there is real-world repercussions here. People do
triggered by Chick-fil-A.
Triggered by Chick-fil-A.
Saying we need to treat everybody with respect.
And that's an offense.
We need to be humble. And the CEO of Chick-fil-A, in a move emulating Jesus Christ and his disciples, gets on his knees and shines the shoes of a black man. And by the way, that may be seen among Trumpers as a weakness. If you've actually read the red letters in the New Testament, that's seen as a strength. And that's called servant leadership. And yet they're clueless because they take the name evangelical. They have no idea what any of it means. It is all politics. It is all posing.